Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Good morning, everyone. Just coming in. Almost
Hello.
afternoon.
Good morning.
Hello.
Wishful
Morning.
thinking, though.
Morning.
Almost there.
Yeah, almost there. It's Friday.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
What's happening?
Happy Friday.
Yes.
Marlena, you look like a mafia don there.
I know. I don't know why it's so dark in my background.
Let me tell you about diversity today.
I'm just gonna go off video then.
You scared her.
No, you kind of looked like sophisticated, like Steve Jobs, like with the lid up front and kind of like the dark
Oh, well,
background with the
thank
dark
you.
shirt.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Jason. I'll
you're
take
welcome.
that. I'll take that versus the mafia comment. That's probably going to come up as an opportunity of a word not to use.
So anyone who's in here, I put this in the email, that the reminder that I sent out yesterday that we are recording, but it's only for Keith's personal use. He's just going to take some clips. So we're not going to be, distributing it to anyone. So it's just clips of his own presentation.
Okay. I did share the email that you sent, Adrian, with
Oh,
my
thank you
team.
so much. Thank you.
Yes.
So it's 11:01. If Karen, if you want to, just start us off, I'll let people in and we can get started.
Sounds good. So welcome everybody to our Lunch and Learn event today. My name is Karen Carr, and I'm the Greater Valley Forge Human Resources Association board member for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I want to thank you for joining us today, and we're glad you can be here with us. I'm going to get us started today by introducing our speaker, Keith A. Willis. Hi, Keith. So Keith
Hey,
is
Karen.
president and founder of Core Management Training. He spent over 25 years in the pharmaceutical industry in various roles. His experience includes sales, sales leadership, operations, and sales training. He has worked with several pharmaceutical companies, including Ciba-Geigy, Johnson & Johnson, Wyeth, Pfizer, Otsuka, and Bristol-Myers Squibb. So lots of companies. Today, he specializes in sales training and leadership consulting across a variety of industries. Keith earned his diversity and inclusion yellow belt through Six Sigma Global Institute. Keith is a former captain in the United States Army, where he had responsibilities as the administrative officer for an 800 soldier battalion. So thank you, Keith, for your service. Keith lives in Montgomery County with his wife, Lori. One quick note, Keith has pictures of him sitting on the Berlin Wall a couple weeks before it started coming down. So how about that? So during the presentation today, there will be opportunities to ask questions. We'll be monitoring the chat, and Kevin will also be pausing to see if there are any questions while he's presenting. So now, Keith, I'll hand it over to you for localizing diversity, empowering managers to drive effective diversity initiatives.
Thank you, Karen. Really appreciate it. So really excited to be here today. I like to say that I am a reluctant DEI champion. Most of my career has been either as a first or second line manager, time in the military. So I've been around DEI pretty much all of my life. I've had opportunity to be on some boards. I've been on the Chamber of Commerce DEI committees and have had an opportunity to see a lot. What made me kind of jump into DEI? I had an incident that happened during COVID, and the webinar that I was doing was hijacked. And so there was somebody that was on that they had no clothes on, they had a Santa hat on, and they were spewing racial epithets. So there was a part of it that was funny because they had a Santa hat on, and it's kind of like, this is what you've got time to do. But it also made me realize that, diversity is something that everybody struggles with. And that's regardless of what race you are, what gender you are. We all see the world through our own eyes. And sometimes it's difficult to be in somebody else's shoes. So as we get started, you can see here in the bottom corner, there is a link. So if you want to download the participant guide, I know that it was sent out, but you might not have received it. You should be able to go to my link profile, and you will see on the next slide, that's what it will look like. And then you'll have an opportunity to download that. So if you want to take notes, you want to refer to it later, or if you want to come back later and refer to it, that'll be a great opportunity for you. So when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when a CEO or leadership team kind of sets the vision, it ultimately comes down to the first line, second line manager that makes it happen. So I know a lot of organizations, there have been chief diversity officers, there have been a lot of people that have been put in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Nothing really happens unless the first or second line manager takes some level of action. What we're going to talk about, we're going to define DEI. We're going to discuss the business case for DEI. We're going to talk a little bit about the role of leadership, and then we will get into some best practices. And hopefully you'll be able to share some of your observations. Want to make this an interactive session. If you have to listen to me for the entire hour, it probably means that things didn't go too well. So I want to take you up on that offer, this being interactive. So if you could write in your chat box, in chat, what instruments make up an orchestra? And if you could be specific in the types of instruments like violin, clarinet, and there's a specific reason I'm asking you for those different instruments. So I see flutes, violin, cello, double bass, drums, xylophone, drums, string instruments, woodwind, brass, percussion, saxophone, viola, tuba, clarinet, sousaphone, percussion, strings, triangle. So you can see there are a lot of instruments that make up an orchestra. And if you've been to the orchestra before, my guess is you haven't necessarily seen all of those instruments. And the point with this is that the more instruments there are in an orchestra, generally the better the orchestra is going to sound. If you have maybe 10 instruments, music will sound pretty good. But if you have 20 different instruments, it's going to be a lot fuller. So when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really having everybody as a part of the orchestra or helping with the business or whatever we're trying to accomplish, which makes things a lot more impactful and meaningful for everybody. So I want to thank everybody for their contributions to that chat. And then I posed the question, what does DEI mean? So this is the definition that I came up with. Diversity, equity, inclusion are three closely linked values held by many organizations that are working to be supportive of different groups of individuals, including people of different races, ethnicities, religions, abilities, genders, and sexual orientation. In the chat, are there any other thoughts in regards to that, or do people feel like that DEI definition is all encompassing? Somebody added neurodiversity. Lisa, thank you. Melissa, socioeconomic status, anything that makes a person an individual. Karen talks about education. So those are all definitely things that should be included in DEI. I know a little bit later we'll get into a little bit of a discussion about why it's important for organizations to have some level of a definition around diversity, equity, inclusion. So I went back and forth several times with why diversity, equity, inclusion. I tried to think of a good story. I think yesterday I had the marshmallow challenge. Wasn't sure that was going to resonate with people. So here's what I came up with. Karen alluded to that I spent some time in the Army. I spent 6 years in the Army, and I was there. I was overseas for over half of that time. And I like to think of the military as a collection of characters. I know we've all seen a lot of military movies, and one of the things, two highlights generally, a couple highlights, always focused on discipline. The other part of it is people taking orders. I think one of the things that's truest, though, is about the collection of characters. So any movie, you always have different characters. They're very, very different. There's some level of conflict, but people have come from different walks in lives. And I would probably say that's the truest part of the military. Obviously, the discipline just kind of comes, but not as much as you think. And when it comes to following orders, probably not that much different than corporate America. Yeah, you have a hierarchy, but those officers that have to rely upon their rank are those officers that don't do as well as those that it's about relationships. So when I think about the things that we used to do, really diversity, equity, inclusion falls within the scope of what the military is really about. I remember we were on a field exercise, and I was with one of my sergeants, and I was responsible for leading the convoy. So imagine there are about 30 or 40 vehicles. It is snowing like nobody's business. I mean, literally, you can't see more than maybe 5-10 feet in front of you. And I'd been to, when I went to school, you had the map course and everything, and we were Fort Riley, Kansas, and it rained, but that was fairly simple. Here, you're reading a map, and you have about 50 or 60 vehicles that are behind you. And I remember the sergeant that was with me, he spoke German. His wife was German, and he was fluent in German. And I remember he used to always say, well, my German's not that good. I only speak like a 7th or 8th grade level. And I used to think, well, that's a lot better than I can do. I can order beer, I can get something to eat and ask for where the restroom is, but that's about it. But I was so happy to have him in the Jeep with me, because not only could he read a map, but if we needed directions, he could ask somebody for directions. Because, I mean, you don't want to get lost with about 40 or 50 vehicles and you can't see in front of you. So we made it to where we are. But it really is why diversity, equity, and inclusion are so important, because ultimately, wherever we are, wherever we work, it really is a collection of characters. We all are characters. We all have our unique personality traits and things that we bring to the table. And when we're allowed to bring those things to the table, then everybody benefits a lot more. Some of the things I learned in the military around innovation, how to do things differently. And those are all things because we had people with lots of different experiences that were able to bring those experiences to the table. And so we were able to leverage those experiences, and that really made things a lot better. So that's kind of part of the reason behind, why diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but when we look at ethnic and gender equality and the fact that it equates to more profitability, and I have a few charts that I'm going to walk through, so I'm not going to go through each of these bullets in detail. I do want to highlight that many organizations are retooling programs after the Supreme Court rules on affirmative action. Just want to get a good sense of how many of you have or know that your organizations are beginning to relook their DEI programs just because of the Supreme Court ruling. So I'm going to take a pause here, see if there are any comments, any chats in regards to that. I also want to take the opportunity to highlight, Joe had made a comment around the definition, the fact that it seems to be broadly inclusive in its definition. Also important distinction between equality and equity. Joe, are you able to say a little bit more about that, or?
Yeah, I think that with equality, people, again, I think that there's a meme that's circulated around that I, kind of reference in my head where it's like equality is giving everybody the opportunity to see the game, but equity is more getting people to all see the game and from the same perspective. So I think that I don't know if you guys seen the meme. It's like a cartoon of people standing on 3 boxes looking at a baseball field. So in the first screen, you have 3 people kind of staggered up and everybody gets a leg up, but still some people can't see over the fence into the field, right? And then other people on the other side to comparatively show what equity is. It shows that some boxes are raised a little higher so that people can get up and see over the fence, because some people, don't have that same advantage that other people might have, right? So I think that that's just an important distinction that I've come to really recognize when defining equality and equity. And I think that there's an important aspect of both that need to be represented. And I think that it depends on where the organization is, depending on how you're going to move forward, I guess. I think you can't have one without the other, but I think, equality probably should be recognized first. I don't know if equity is always going to be in the included into a work type role. I think equity is more societal. That's how I view it.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Really appreciate that. Yeah. Good insight. Very good insight. In regards to the Supreme Court ruling, I do know that there are some companies that are relooking their programs. I do think that, and we're not going to talk necessarily a lot about it. I think it's really, and I think one of the challenges is that people think about DEI, they feel like that it means quotas. And I don't think that it means quotas. I think ultimately it's how do you create a pool or a group of people that are the best talent available, whether you're hiring or within an organization, and create a fair playing field for everybody to be able to succeed. So I think it is one of the challenges. I know when I was doing some research for this, I came across comments. There's a YouTube video or a TED Talk done by Janet Stovall from Davidson College. They had this Project 87 that she was involved with as a student. And so she talked about some of the things that they were trying to accomplish. And so some of the comments were around quotas and things like that. And really, that's not what DEI is about, is not about quotas. So I do know that when you're running a business, though, that there are going to be concerns about what the Supreme Court says, because ultimately no one wants to get sued. And my time, whether it be in corporate or owning my own business, I think at the end of the day, one of the things you want to do is try to avoid being in court for any reason at all. So that's my 2 cents on that. I do want to get into some of this data. So this comes from McKinsey. So McKinsey has done several reports. This one is around ethnic and gender equality. So what they found is that when you have ethnic and gender equality, it equates to more profitability. So here on this slide here, you can see the different studies or papers that McKinsey has had around diversity. So there's been from 2015 to 2023, and if you type in, you'll see there's also a diversity report that they do, and I think that was originally in 2020. But when you look at representation of women and then the number of companies, so this middle section shows the number of companies that were involved. What they found is that over the course from 2015 to 2023, that those companies were more profitable relatively to those that did not, where women were not involved within the organization, leadership roles and those type of things. And then here, the bottom portion, ethnic diversity representation, same, you can see the difference from 2015 to 2023. So when we look at women, ethnicity and gender within the workforce, we know that organizations are more profitable. And this was across country, so this was not just in the United States when McKinsey looked at this information. When we look at racial and ethnic equality, the numbers are even more striking. So when we have racial and ethnic diversity, it has a stronger impact on financial performance in the United States than gender diversity. Same setup here. In the column, women representation, ethnic diversity representation, and then gender and ethnicity. So 2020 to 2023. So one of the things they did here is they also included those that finished in the bottom quartile. So you can see as we get from a gender and ethnicity perspective, the bottom quartile here, and then ethnic diversity, the bottom quartile here. So there are striking differences. So ultimately, racial and ethnic diversity also have significant impact on the bottom line. So if you're looking for reasons why we should do diversity, equity, inclusion, a lot of those have to do with the data. There's also data around innovation. Those companies that have more diverse leadership teams also derive more of their financial performance from innovation. Was there a comment? Did somebody have a comment?
Oh, yeah, it is. I don't kill it. It's possible. I gave it.
So one of the things that's really important is around the, impact of leaders and what leaders do. So these are just some bullets here that I pulled from a variety of different places, and a couple of ones I want to highlight. Obviously employees take their cues from leaders. Sorry about that. Engage leaders' authenticity based on their actions, words, and strategies. I put George Floyd in comma here because there were a lot of different types of conversations that were going on. And then this third bullet, 42% of U.S. managers strongly agree that they are prepared to have a meaningful conversation about race with their teams. And that was a belief from Gallup. If we flip it around, that means almost 60% of managers are not prepared to have a meaningful conversation about race. And then less than half of managers report having received diversity training. And the managers who have received training are more prepared for conversations. I say responses generally around diversity training, there's always a level of trepidation because I think a lot of people feel that there's going to be a lot of blame around current situation, so on and so forth. And I think it's really more around trying to have an open and honest conversation. Oftentimes there are conversations that happen in hallways that are open that negatively impact DEI efforts. I remember, and I don't even know if it was George Floyd. It may have been some other incident that occurred, but I know there were conversations that I had with peers or people that I knew, at least in life sciences, around some of the situations that had occurred. And so oftentimes either their manager or their manager's manager would engage. In this case, these were African-American employees around things that should be done, how, what type of help they could be given. And then in the same breath, and at the time the election was going on, and so there would be these other conversations that people would also have, and it would pull away from that conversation because that person would say, here's where someone's beliefs are. I don't really know if I'm going to really I'm going to get any help. And I think it's difficult as a leader because in the environment that we're in, we're in an environment where everything's very, very polarized. There's a lot of negativity in the marketplace, not in the marketplace, but just in general. And that's at every level. You know, whether it be race, whether it be wars that are going on, you know, people use a lot of words and a lot of things that in some cases can be very inflammatory. And obviously we all come to work with our stuff, what we believe in, our values and those type of things. And it can be very difficult as a leader because how do you be who you are? Because you have a belief system, how you were raised, how you see the world, so on and so forth. And then there's an expectation at work of how you're going to be, how you're going to present, and then they often clash. It was interesting because Stacey Abrams, you know, everybody knows is a big Democrat. She's run for run as a governor. She run for a lot of offices, so on and so forth, and knows her stance. I don't know what people. I don't know if people know that she's in business with another lady that's a staunch Republican. And they actually have a pretty cool system because what they do is they enable business owners to get their money early by they basically buy the invoice or the check and then they do the billing on the back end. So here's two people on the opposite ends of the spectrum that are able to be in business together and make things work. So I think ultimately when we talk about a world of work, that's really what we're looking for. I think it's okay for people to have different opinions, do different things. How do you help people be able to have the conversations where you're able to be true to your values, but see the world through another place? So I think if we can accomplish that, then things like having more managers open or being able to have those conversations will make a really big difference. I was working on a project and I know that there had been a death that somebody had gotten killed by the police, and the guy that I was working on a project with, and he told me, he said he could not work. He was so emotionally distraught. Now, I looked at it from a different lens because we come from different experiences and but it hit a lot of people in a lot of ways. And so just the ability to be able to have those conversations can make all the difference in the world. I equate it to, 9/11. That was a very, very traumatic day for a lot of people. And ability for people to be able to get in a room from different backgrounds, religions, so on and so forth, made a big difference. I was listening to a motivational speaker that talked about an experience he had because they were doing an event during 9/11, how he was able to bring people together and have these conversations. So whether you're a leader, i.e., I run a team, or you're a leader as an individual because you're in a company, people look up to you versus your experiences, so on and so forth. Your impact that you have as a leader is significant. In fact, Gallup estimates that managers are responsible for 70% of the variance in employee engagement. And when we look at some of the other data and some of the numbers, we talk a lot about DEI, but ultimately, a lot of this is it's human stuff. DEI is just as much a part of emotional intelligence, social style, social intelligence, and those things. And the probability is the higher level of skills you have there, the more impact that you're gonna be able to have with your people. So I'm gonna pause there. Would love to get some comments, thoughts, feelings in regards to what I've said in regards to leadership.
Yeah, I think a lot of your assessment is spot on. I mean, just, speaking from personal experience, I do think a lot of our frontline managers have a greater impact. While, we need rules and we need policies in place, it's not, the board that is, driving diversity and inclusion. It's the frontline managers who are actually working with the people and ensuring that teams have a variety of these types of things, like more women on, more people of color, more minorities on the staff. And honestly, I don't think it takes laws from the US government to tell companies to do this. At least in my experience, a lot of companies are very aware of the cultural impacts and the things going on with diversity and inclusion. In my company specifically, we have a corporate structure in Europe, so there's also a European influence on what we're doing. So it's not just looking at what the laws in the US are. We tend to, as a company, look at things at what's right for our people. And I think that as more companies, don't rely on laws that tell them to be, good corporate partners, we'll see better results. And we are seeing better results. And I don't think it's because we have an affirmative action, law that's been around for a few decades now. I think that we're seeing a shift in this being better as a culture, in the United States and in the world, because people are paying attention and they are seeing it and they're saying, we need to do better here, and we can do better here. And I think as more people look at that and, our frontline managers apply those things to their day-to-day activities, it is what retains people and want them to continue to work for your company. If they feel included, no matter what background they're from, they're more apt to want to stay and work hard for your company. So I think that, these numbers are in line with what I see on a regular basis. And I work in learning and development. So it's a lot of, training and teaching everybody that comes into the company. So, at least in my experience, I feel like the things that you're saying here are what I'm also seeing in my day-to-day activities.
Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate that. Yeah, it's usually, and it's real subtle sometimes. We don't realize it, the diversity of a team or, the people. And it makes a big difference when you're able to be informed or involved. I mean, it makes life richer. It's kind of like you get to do a lot of different stuff. You're always learning new stuff, I guess, at the end of the day, because people have different cultures, different things, different perspectives that you don't necessarily think about that they bring to the table that everybody benefits from. I think one of the important things, I put this as a first best practice, is the define DEI. And I put this here for really for this reason, because whether good or bad, when I'd be out looking for a job and a company would say, we have a diverse group of people, so on and so forth, first thing I would go do is look at the board of directors and see how diverse the board of directors would be. And then try to get a sense of really what's the diversity like in this organization. And I have worked at companies where they have boasted about their commitment to diversity. But if I looked at the organization, I would say, you know what, not really diverse, or certain areas. So for example, at least in life sciences, if you generally want to be a CEO or if you want to be in senior management, generally most of those people have traditionally come from the commercial side of the business, which means entry level is as a sales rep carrying a bag. And so from my perspective, it would be, well, how many regional directors are minorities or diverse types of candidates, so on and so forth. And so those are ways that gauge. I was at a company where when I initially started to work there, what I was told that it was a company of a lot of old men is what I was told. And over the years that I was there, I don't know, I guess it would have been 3 or 4 years before we were bought, I saw the diversity change, gender, race. The organization literally changed before my eyes, and it was my best experience. It was actually a sad day when we were bought, but moving the ball forward, I think that it was an organization that changed over time. And I think ultimately it means that any organization can change and be better for it. So the flip side of it is by having a more diverse culture, more diverse leadership, so on and so forth, the company put itself in a position to be able to be bought. And, hindsight is a lot of people don't feel that the company would have been able to stand on its own because of the products that were in the pipeline. So ultimately, it probably was a good thing. So those are things that I look at. I know in the Philadelphia Business Journal, it was last year, they did a ranking of, I believe, the top 75 companies. And so a lot of those companies had pictures of, the people that were in the organization. So when you looked, there wasn't necessarily a lot of diversity within those pictures. So those are things that people look at, whether they be customers or even employees when they're looking at an organization. I just think that if you define it, Whether or not the employees agree with it or not is maybe not as important to know at least what the company is striving for. So at least you know what that definition is, and you feel like the company's being on the up and up with you around what they feel diversity, equity, and inclusion. And sometimes that's really more around, so for some companies, this is what I mean by this. For some companies, their diversity, their focus is not necessarily as much on race as it is in people differences, i.e., age, background, all of those type of things. And I think that's okay if that's what you define and that's what you tell your employees that it's going to be. So I think that you'll get a lot more buy-in in types of programs where everybody is at least aligned on the organizational definition. And then another best practice is really to evaluate where you are. So you have to, it's good to be able to evaluate current levels of diversity. And what I mean by that, sometimes companies will evaluate their diversity and they'll say it's really good, but it's good in a certain area. So it might be entry-level position. So from an entry level standpoint, you have a lot of people. Well, what about further within the organization, whether it be marketing, other leadership roles, and things like that? So really think about what the current levels are across the organization. And then I think the other part of that is then use that your company definition to benchmark what to measure. So if yours is around the differences of types of people, so on and so forth, then you have to measure to that what that is going to be. If it's not racial, ethnicity or gender or whatever that is, make sure that your benchmarks align with your definition. And then to determine where is it that you want to go? Where do you want to be? So you have target numbers. So I think the thing is that I think it's okay to have targets. So for example, 30% for inclusiveness. What that means is that when your numbers for diversity, and include, when your numbers for diversity hit about 30%, the likelihood that you're going to have a more inclusive environment rate rises significantly. If you're below that number, not so much. So that's a target. It doesn't mean that you need to go out and say that in this pool, we're going to definitively hire 30%, the people that we hire, or the 30% of the people we're going to promote, they need to be of this race, so on and so forth. You just have to create a strategy and creating a pool of people that are eligible for those type of roles. And then the more probability is the more diverse of a pool that you have, more diverse development plans and those type of things, then you're going to be more effective in what you're trying to accomplish. And then I think this last point here is create milestones for first and second line managers. So I'm working on a project with a company right now that they're trying to be better at hiring. So I know at least in life sciences back in the day, we used to get a lot of recruiting and selection training. I went through as a rep, I probably went to DDI and a bunch of other training about 4 or 5 times. And then I was what they call a JMO, junior military officer. So there was a whole program. So I learned how to interview people pretty well. In my observation, when we went through training, they told us where to find diverse candidates, but there were no milestones. There was no expectation of having a pool of candidates that would be a diverse pool of candidates, or over time what that would look like. Now we had to interview, at least we were technically supposed to interview 1 person a week or 4 people a month. So we were constantly interviewing to create your bench, so on and so forth. This organization, I talked to one of the managers in prep for the course that we're going to be teaching to the managers, and he said that they had some milestones as an organization about what expectations were. So I think this creates a likelihood, more than likely, that's going to happen, because these are sales reps that are coming into the organization. So managers know they have an expectation of being able to create a diverse pool, and we're going to help them be able to learn how to do that more effectively. So those are just some things I think from evaluating DEI that can be extremely important and extremely beneficial. I want to pause there for a minute because just want to get a sense from everybody. Does your organization define what DEI is, and how do they go about evaluating it? Because that's just, I have my view, and part of the lunch and learn ideally is to learn from each other and see what other organizations are doing.
Keith, I'll share something that we do at our organization. In our engagement survey, we one of the statements is about the employee experience at meetings. And so that's something that we look at across different demographics, because that is, can be like within the team, but also across the organization. So that's something that's important to us, that we see consistency with how different groups respond to that statement.
Thanks, Lisa. And that's a really good point, because I remember being a manager, and talking to sales reps, and you go to these national meetings, so on and so forth, and senior manager gets up and they're always looking for people to raise their hand and speak. And so one of the things I had always been told is that management wants to know how you think and what you're thinking. So if you're going to get promoted, you've got to have a voice, so on and so forth. And so a lot of times we make the assumption that people don't speak because they're afraid to, and there's some, just the normal stuff. But we don't necessarily think of it from the perspective of being in an inclusive environment. Do I actually have a voice, or am I heard? How many times have people been at meetings and they have raised their hand and they're talked over, or people haven't listened, or they say something and then somebody takes their idea and presents it as their own, and that person's given a pat on the back, but the person that spoke it doesn't get any recognition. So those are definitely some things that that data can be super helpful. So thanks for sharing that, Lisa. So I wanted to talk a little bit about inclusive hiring practices. I'll be curious to see where people land with this. So I had mentioned earlier about providing recruiting and selection training. So this is only from my experiences in life sciences. Back in the day, you went through formal training. And then this is back in the day when there used to be newspaper ads. So, but we would bring in candidates as a part of the training. We had actual live interviews that occurred, and there would be openings. Managers would have openings, so on and so forth. But that was part of it. And then somebody would sit in and give you feedback, so on and so forth. I have noticed, at least in the last several corporate organizations that I had worked at, that the recruiting and selection training has been designated to online or e-learning. And so I think it's good from the standpoint it tells you, you can say this, you can ask this question, can't do this, can't do that. As somebody said, podcast I listened to, Manager Tools, the Christmas tree rule, anything that you don't do often, you probably won't do very well. So I do think there's an opportunity for recruiting and selection training. And then I think the other part of it is provide training on unconscious bias. This training should not be designed to beat people in the back. We all have biases. I mean, I have biases. The likelihood that if you made me a manager of a team, then I would have more African Americans that I hired, probably be pretty high. If I had a team of 10 African Americans, probably not good, because I'm not doing diversity. I'm not thinking about diversity. We just think in a certain way. And so I think some of it is just, it helps you just take a pause to think about what you're doing. And then the other part of that is establish a process that will minimize bias. So, for example, how resumes are viewed. So, they've done studies about names that people have, certain backgrounds, that people have. Those sometimes are triggers that we don't necessarily think about. Data also has shown that when managers take more time looking at resumes, they do a better job of screening. Now, I saw something the other day. It said the average manager looked at a resume for about 5 seconds. I don't know if that's really true. They used to say it was 30 seconds. I know people try to scan through resumes. And I know that when I was a manager, over time, there's been more involvement with talent acquisition. So sometimes you have resumes that are actually in the system. I would go through sometimes and review those resumes myself, and sometimes resumes that I thought were resumes of people that I should talk to had not necessarily been picked up. So the other part of that, if you're a hiring manager or even in talent acquisition, I think you should work together as a team. because there's always that possibility of missing people, and ultimately what we're trying to do is find the best available candidates. And then if you create a diverse candidate slate, then the likelihood that you're going to hire somebody that's a diverse candidate is probably going to be better. Now, I had attended a DEI function, and they were having a conversation. So you know how usually you have candidates, you may have 4 candidates, and oftentimes what happens is they get forced ranked. And I think this was at a school when they were looking to hire professors. And so what they found is that even though they had a diverse candidate slate, the people that they were hired were very homogeneous because no one wanted the number 2 or the number 3 person. So what they did is they changed the criteria. So when they created a pool, you were either eligible for hire or you weren't eligible for hire. And so when they created a pool that said that these are the people that we've interviewed and these are the people that are eligible for hire, then they begin to hire a more diverse pool of candidates. So those are just some quick tips of some things that you can do from an inclusive standpoint. They're little things. They can be very slight. That can make a big difference. And then this last piece, cultural fit. So culture is interesting. You know, one of the last companies I was at, they had a very strong culture. It was interesting because the company before used to sell culture, around their culture, so on and so forth. But as soon as new leadership came in, culture would change. This company, they never sold culture, but every time we did a new hire training class, there was at least one person that was coming back to the company. So to me, that's strong culture, because it says there's a very specific person type that wants to be here that fits into that culture. And that can be good and bad, because when you focus so much on cultural fit, sometimes that means your organization doesn't necessarily end up changing. And that just goes beyond race, ethnicity, gender, any of those things. That just think about the types of people that you're trying to bring into an organization if you're trying to change culture. So cultural fit can be good, it can be bad. It just really depends, and it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Especially for first and second line managers, there's culture for your team too. Sometimes you're looking for certain types of personalities, so on and so forth, to round out your team, especially if you've got a sales team. And let's say you got no one on there that, kind of gets things done, and you're looking for those types of people, so on and so forth. So, and then I think the other part of that is, if your team all looks like you, I used to always say, if I had 10 sales reps that looked like me or 10 trainers that looked like me, we'd be in a lot of trouble. Because there's some things I do really well, some stuff not so much. Sometimes need some other people on the team that can take that mantle up and drive that. So I'm going to pause there because I want to get some insights into hiring practices, because I know that's an area that a lot of people have concerns with, and I want to get a few comments before I move on to the next slide there. I did have one comment around AAP. I unfortunately do not know what AAP is. Anybody know what AAP is? This came from Amy.
It's an affirmative action plan.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that there's a big difference between companies, trying to toe the line or do the minimal amount, or just, fall into whatever, as opposed to a company that actually wants to take this and be good at it. I think that's a very distinct difference. And I think that chat is probably, what I'm talking about. I think that there's a lot of places that will just look to fulfill some sort of quota, as you mentioned, and that doesn't really exist. I think that we need to look at talent in a different way, and if we're going to be good, strong leaders, we need to be open to a diverse workforce, and we have to look for that, and we have to be better at finding the right fits and work to eliminate some of the unconscious bias that we have.
Yeah, and Joe, I agree with that. I'm going to tell this quick story, and then I'm going to get into where to find diverse talent. There was a gentleman that I hired. This is years ago now, And, he didn't have, he actually had some clinical background, but no sales experience at all. He was, almost just out of school, young guy. And I had as many reasons to hire him as not to hire him. Very charismatic, great personality. And, it was pharma sales. You have, just didn't have any, none of that background. There was another guy that was interviewing at the same time for my sister district, and they went to the regional manager, and it just so happened to be the regional manager, and this person had been in the same fraternity, so he ended up getting hired. The person that I had interviewed, I ended up bringing him in, and so the interesting thing was that this gentleman was African American, and so being an African American manager, I gave him a chance. My regional director was white. The individual person that was interviewing for the role for the final interview was also white, and so here's how bias. And we call it bias or not bias or whatever, but ultimately we're comfortable with people that have shared experiences. And so in this case, some of the reason, maybe not all, because I wasn't in the interviews and that wouldn't be fair. Some of the reason he got that job was because of shared experience in the fraternity, so on and so forth. And so often is, well, what if he had been Black? The probability that they would have been in the same fraternity probably may not have necessarily happened. Relatively to these two representatives that were interviewing, they probably had the same level of experience. They were early in their career. And it would have been just as easy for us to say no to both of them as it was to say yes. And so the more times that happens, sometimes that person doesn't get that opportunity and get that chance. Now, that was years ago now. This guy's been a senior director. I mean, he's done a lot of stuff within pharma. And so the ability to be able to bring that person into the organization, and not only just a company, but into an industry, people have been able to benefit from his talent. It also works on the other end, because I had somebody on my team that they were older. They were a white woman and they were older. They were probably, and this was back when, reps were hired, they were kids then. And so she was probably in her 40s and I hired her. So she's an oncology trainer now. And that was many, many years ago. So diversity works in a lot of different ways, but those are through the lenses when we talk about inclusive hiring practices, that we can limit ourselves in talent, because it's not always race. Sometimes it's age, and age on both ends, extremely young or older, early career, late career. At the end of the day, it's really about bringing on the best talent, and that best talent, what it's going to do for the organization. All right, so this is a question that comes up a lot around, how do I find diverse talent? So obviously job boards, I'm going to go to a couple of things. So employee referral programs work. But if you don't have a lot of people that are diversity, the likelihood that other people know diverse candidates is not as high. I also put in parentheses ERGs, because when we think about internally, so these employee resource groups, that's actually an opportunity. So a lot of times these are set up, they kind of get development, but they don't, it's not formalized. I came across something just recently. I'm facilitating an assessment that an organization is doing for their ERG group. So they're bringing in their leads, and their global leads and their regional leads, and they're doing an assessment on how that team works together in those roles in their ERG. So they use it as a pipeline for developing internal talent. So I thought it was an excellent idea, because I've been involved in a lot of ERGs, but there's never been a very formalized development process for people that are in those groups. And ERGs span, race, gender, ethnicity, veterans, so on and so forth. So I think that's probably opportunity, if you have ERG, to look at how those are being utilized and how you might be able to leverage those more. On the sales side, there's a group called the National Sales Network. This was primarily in the past, primarily focused on life sciences. And for minorities and African Americans, this mission is expanded, so it's across all sales. And in a lot of major cities, they will have local chapters. They usually have a national meeting at least once a year. I know that there are organizations that will send teams to the National Sales Network. There was a gentleman that I was mentoring, and I knew he was going to the National Sales Network and he was interviewing. I knew he was going to get an offer at that conference because they did a job fair there, because I knew the hiring manager. He and I worked at the same gym together, and somehow or another we figured out we knew this guy and that he was going to get an offer from the organization. So National Sales Network is a good place to find diverse candidates. The National Black MBA Association is another association. You can do interviews there. I've been at that meeting where you interview a lot of different candidates. I know here again in life sciences, and I apologize because that's, been most of my professional experience has been on the life sciences side. But a lot of pharma companies will bring in MBA interns as a part of the summer programs, and sometimes those people end up directly on the marketing team. You also have Pro-Spanica. I have not been involved with that, but it's the Hispanic version of MBA. There's also an Asian MBA organization. So these are just some organizations that you can go online. You can get a sense of, do they have a local conference? Do they have national conference? How can you get involved in some of those organizations? Fraternities and sororities. There are a lot of different fraternities and sororities among, different races and ethnic groups. Professional organizations. So if you own an architect firm and you want to figure out, where can I find diverse candidates, there's a high likelihood that there's a professional organization for African Americans or Hispanics. The Chamber of Commerce, there's the African American Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. That, some of the folks that are at the Chamber of Commerce, some of the businesses in some cases are larger, so those might be possible pools of candidates of people that have experiences. So that's just some places that you can find diverse talent. Yeah, I know some of you may network, and some of the networking groups that you go to may not necessarily find that you see a lot of people from diverse backgrounds there, but these are just some of the places where other people hang out where you probably can find some talent. So I want to pause there because I want to see if anybody else has any other suggestions and ideas around where they find diverse talent and what they found has worked for them.
So I'll share again. We didn't intentionally set out to do this, but ended up hiring someone that was formerly incarcerated, and since then have hired other people that have gone through like the same program that she did, and they've been some of our most successful people in the position that we've hired them for. The training that they received while they were incarcerated fits nicely with the role that we've hired them for, and so that has been a good source for us. And I'll be honest, as an HR professional, it was the first time in my career that I had done that, and I found that they had different needs, and my conversations with them have been different than with other employees. So
thank you, Lisa. One other thing that I don't have on here. So when I got into pharma, I was what they called a JMO, a junior military officer. So back in the day, there were specific agencies. That's all they did, they would bring a JMO. So there was a fair. I went through Cameron Brooks, so they had a whole program and everything, and you come out on base and give you a whole spiel. And he'd take like 3% of the people that he interviewed, probably the hardest interview I ever had in my entire life. And so there's a couple of different agencies like that. There are more opportunities now. I've been a mentor for American Corporate Partners. Their role is to help, people in the military transition into corporate life. So there are lots of additional types of groups if you're looking for specific types of talent, whether that be veteran talent. It literally, you can make a list of who are we looking to bring into our organization, and then figure out how do we get in front of those people to bring them into our organization and sell them into our organization. So I think the big point around finding diverse talent, you just have to make a plan. You for everybody else, you can kind of go out and you can find people, but you have to spend a little time. And if you spend a little time, you'll find that you'll have a better and more diverse pool, and you'll have a stronger organization. And then these are just some additional initiatives that you can have. I think mentoring and sponsorship is huge. Here again, when we look at how people get promoted, oftentimes it's this, well, the sponsorship is huge. I mean, I ended up at a couple of different companies because my sponsor said, you should interview Keith, and Keith ends up getting a job. So I can't, those are important. And then informal mentoring and informal mentoring, and looking within the organization, if you have formal programs, how do people get access to mentorship? Or even informally, how do people get access to mentors? How do they get how do they get in front of a sponsor? How do you become a sponsor? There was a guy that used to mentor me. He used to tell me, here's how succession planning works. He said, only a couple of people get discussed because there's not a lot of time. He said, you have to do is you got to get on one of those. He called them nighttime projects. Got to get on a nighttime project because the nighttime project gets discussed during succession planning, and you want to be the one that gets discussed at those meetings. So those are things you can just think about when you're thinking about even these programs, and even when you have employee resource groups and you're trying to develop and share information. That's the type of information that's helpful. I mean, people know they need to have a mentor, but the value or understanding, how do I go about getting a sponsor, a lot of people just don't understand. So those can be some important types of things that people can learn about. And then analyze talent practices. Who has access to some of these on-the-job training and other key assignments that get them that exposure? Who's tapped for training and leadership experiences? Who receives mentoring and sponsorship? There was organization I was at, they had, so the sales VP, what she wanted was each regional director to find a sales representative of diverse background and mentor them to help that person get promoted. We also had another program where people would interview for kind of internal opportunities. They weren't jobs. They were more of, you're going to do like a rotation of marketing, you can do a rotation of sales training, whatever. People would interview. And so, sometimes you have somebody that's close and then you don't have a space for them, and somebody else has a space. And I remember selling one of the candidates to somebody that was kind of wishy-washy about their interview and how well they did. Fast forward, 5 or 6 years now, this person's a regional director. At the time, they was a sales rep. Eventually, they had an opportunity to do a rotation. They became a district manager. They came in-house for an in-house role. So in some cases, this is how it happens. It's really about providing people conversations. And we talk about first and second line managers. The most important relationship that you have is the relationship that you have with your manager. And if that's true, it's those conversations that can make all the difference in the world, or your manager taking the extra time to advocate for their people, because that's part of the job anyway. And regardless of who's on their team, getting their most talented people opportunities to move them along. And I know sometimes it's easy to hoard talent because sometimes it's a double-edged sword, because you get rid of good talent, you got to bring somebody new on your team. And as I used to have a boss say, when you bring somebody new into the organization, you've brought on a C performer, and you got to get them up to speed. So the other part of that is that when you get people promoted, people want to come work for you because they know that they have an opportunity and they have a chance. And then I know we're coming up on time, so just a couple of more additional slides. DEI is leadership development. So don't think of it as just DEI. It's all of these skills: coaching, mentoring, sponsorship, social styles, emotional intelligence, learning agility, communication skills. Anything that you teach a leader, all of those soft skills, the more effective those soft skills are, more than likely, the better they're going to be in DEI. And if you embed some of these DEI concepts within your leadership development programs, those folks are going to be a lot better. And then the other piece of this is DEI and well-being strategies. These pieces go together. And I pulled this from Gallup. So I found this interesting because it goes back to the other piece that I just showed around leadership development. So if you look at this list, You were treated with less courtesy than other people. People acted as they thought you were not smart. People acted as they thought you were dishonest. People acted as they were better than you. You were called a name or insulted. So this was from 2021. So we had white employees, Black employees, Hispanic employees. So regardless what race you are, the numbers are just too high. And that's just the bottom line. So I go back to the previous slide. If you train people to be effective managers and learn how to treat people, or even with an organization, teach people how to treat people respectfully, then these numbers should go down. And then I think at the end of the day, it's really about best talent. When you have a diverse workforce and you have a diverse team, you're going to have best talent. You're going to be a better organization. You're going to improve the quality of decision-making, increase customer insights and innovation, drive employee motivation, satisfaction, and ultimately improve a company's global image and license to operate. So what it does is it creates a healthy environment. And so I think the challenge is that there are a lot of organizations that have not necessarily embraced DEI. And we can look at them and we can say, yeah, you know, they have a decent, you know, talent pool. The decision making seems to be good. They've got decent innovation. They bring good products to the table. They have a good image. The question is, how much more are we leaving on the table when we look at it from that perspective, that we're already good enough? So that's all I got for right now. So what questions, comments, thoughts do you have?
I just want to say thank you for the presentation and the content. It was good. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
You know, the conversation is being able to see things from other people's viewpoints. So for me, it's nice to be able to hear other people's thoughts, and you correlated some experiences that you've had in your career. So I think that always is helpful to me to be able to understand, from your shoes or other people's shoes, with examples of the things you've run into. So appreciate you sharing those, and appreciate just the presentation in general.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. So if you're too bashful to speak and you do want to connect with me, you can use any of these methods. You can use the QR code and click my link, and it'll take you to my link account, and you can share information. If you just want to send me an email, you can, or if you just want to connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn link is actually on my link profile, but if you type in Keith Willis, core management training, I should pop up. There are a couple of Keith Willises, and I know one of them is a football player, and one used to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but that was many, many years ago. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Karen and Adrian. I want to thank everybody for the participation. Thanks for your involvement and your comments. That helped make this much better, and hopefully everybody was able to get something out of this.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Keith. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the education. Thank you for the tips today. And thank you for helping us to feel more empowered, right? That's what we needed today.
Thank you.
So thank you. And thank you all of you for participating today. Look forward to seeing you at future Greater Valley Forge events. Have a great day, great Friday, and a great afternoon.
Take care.
Thank
you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Keith and Karen, did it still, so my computer blacked out and then it stopped recording on my end for you, Keith. Is it recording on your end? Because it stopped.
No. But you probably have some recording.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. My entire screen went blank and I heard you talking for like 3 minutes and then I had to then it went away. I don't know what happened. Thank God you guys were both co-hosts, but I am going to look at, actually it does say pause or stop. Let's see. Are you sure you want to stop recording?